Farewell and adieu to your fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to your ladies of Spain. For we've received orders to sail for old England. But we hope very soon we shall see yous again. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly, there's 35 leagues. We hove our ship to with the wind as southwest, boys. We hove our ship to, deep soundings to bear at 45 fathoms with a fine sandy bottom. We squared our main yard and up channel steered we. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly, 'tis 35 leagues. The next land we sighted was called the Dotton, the next Ram's Head off Plymouth, off Portland the White. We sailed by Beachy, then Fairley and Dungeness, then we bore straight away for the South Foreland Light. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly, 'tis 35 leagues. The signal was made for the Grand Fleet to anchor all in the Downs that night for to lie. Let go your shank painter, let go your cat stopper, haul up your clue garnets, let tack and sheets fly. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly, 'tis 35 leagues. So let every man toss off a full bumper, and let every man drink up his full glass. We'll drink and be jolly and drown melancholy, singing here's a good health to my true-hearted lass. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly, 'tis 35 leagues. From Ushant to Scilly, 'tis 35 leagues. Spanish Ladies is one of my favourite shanties. I love the E minor key that I get to sing it in. It fits quite nicely in that. It's just got this really nice melody to it, and the lyrical content of it is very, very nautical. It is clear that when this song was written, it was written by folks who were very familiar with sailing vessels and the act of sailing. This was clearly not a song written by landlubbers. Spanish Ladies is kind of popularised by its appearance in the film Jaws. Quinn sings it numerous times throughout the film.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies.
And I think a lot of people do wonder if perhaps it was written for that film. And no, this is an old song hailing all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars in the 1700s. During the Napoleonic Wars, England didn't really want to get involved. We kind of knew that whilst we held the naval power, Napoleon absolutely held the power on land. So what England did at the time was essentially to blockade France. During this time then, a lot of sailors would have been stationed in Spain. Farewell and adieu To your fair Spanish ladies, farewell and adieu. To your ladies of Spain, for we've received orders to sail for old England. But we hope very soon we shall see yous again. Now the first verse really harkens to this farewell and adieu to you Spanish ladies, to you fair Spanish ladies. Because whilst those sailors were stationed in Spain, it's inevitable that some of them ultimately fell in love with Spanish women. And when the call was to come home, well, there was no way to either stay behind. They couldn't stay behind. They were still signed up to the Navy, right? But at the same token, they couldn't bring their new girlfriends or wives with them. They had to leave them behind. Which is why Spanish Ladies, I think, is better sung in the minor key rather than sometimes being sung in a major key. I think it is inherently quite a sad, doleful song. They are saying farewell to the women that they have fallen in love with, to perhaps families that they had started at that time. And there was no guarantee in those days that if they sailed back to England, that they would ever come back to Spain. And so it was kind of a fingers crossed I'll get to see you again at some day in the future. And it is a hope. It's not a, oh, hope to see you soon and, we'll see you in a week's time. That's a long old trip. And they had no idea if they were ever coming back. We'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. We'll rant and we'll roar across the salt seas until we strike soundings in the channel of old England. From Ushant to Scilly is 35 leagues. The chorus of Spanish Ladies is a bit of an unusual one. This idea of ranting and roaring isn't necessarily the kind of behaviour you would expect of an Englishman, although to be fair, spend a night in Magaluf or Benidorm and I'm pretty sure you might think otherwise. This was designed as a way of getting those sailors to up their spirits as they were heading off into the ocean, leaving their fair ladies behind them. Rant and roar like true British sailors. Bring up those spirits. Don't feel sad. Don't be upset. Be a British sailor, right? And then until we strike soundings in the Channel of Old England. Now, soundings are used on nautical charts. Essentially, they are the lay of the undersea land. And at the front of a ship, you would have a guy who would drop a lead line, a line that had lots of little lead weights on it, and could lower that into the water to see how deep they actually were. And thus, by finding how deep you were, plus using other equipment, you could kind of look at the chart and figure out where you had arrived to. We then have from Ushant to Scilly. Now, Ushant is an island off the French coast, and Scilly, obviously, is off the coast of Cornwall. So the route that they had planned, the tack that they had planned, would be to sail up the west coast of France, then up to the Scilly Isles, and then east along the English Channel from there. We hove our ship to, with the wind as southwest, boys. We hove our ship to, deep soundings to bear, at 45 fathoms with a fine sandy bottom. We squared our main yard and up channel steered we. Now the second verse uses a word that doesn't get used often in English anymore, hove. Hove is ultimately the past version of to heave. So to heave something would be to push it, like you're heaving a capstan or heaving a cart or that kind of thing. To heave a ship is basically to sail it. It's just another way of saying that. It's a nautical way of saying that. So we hove our ship to with the wind at southwest, boys. The wind is blowing to the southwest and they're still heaving the ship up through that north towards Scilly. We hove our ship to, deep soundings to bear. So again, they're taking those measurements with the lead line to see where they are and measure the soundings as they go. 'Twas 45 fathoms with a fine sandy bottom. At this point again, that lead line has gone down to a depth of 45 fathoms. Now a fathom is 240 feet, so that's quite deep water there, with a fine sandy bottom because you can feel what it hits when it reaches the bottom. It's not rocks, therefore they can look at their charts and see fine sand with 45 fathoms of depth, therefore we know where we are. Then we squared our main yard and up channel steered we. A yard arm is the long horizontal bar across a mast that actually has the sails attached to it. So by squaring the main yard, what you are doing is turning the rolled up sheet on the main yard into a square sheet. a sail. They are then going up the channel, using that wind behind them to sail off home. The next land we sighted was called the Don. The next Ram's Head off Plymouth, off Portland the White. We sailed by Beachy, then Fairlie and Dungeness. Then we bore straight away for the South Foreland Light. Now the third verse is actually one of my favourites. It's a little bit trickier with its lyrical content because the lyrics don't quite fit with the time rhythm, especially Dungeness, which we'll get to in a moment. And it's why some versions of this song do change this third verse to reference different places. This third verse is them just listing off all the different bits that they're sailing past, the things they've seen. So the next land we made was called the Dodman. It's actually spelt Deadman, but pronounced Dodman at the time. Followed by Ramhead off Plymouth, or Ramshead as we'd know it nowadays, Portland, and the Wight, the Isle of Wight they're sailing past. Then we sailed by Beachy, by Fairlie, and Dungeness. Dungeness is just up the road from me here. It's, if you look at a map of Kent, you can see it's this big spit that comes off on the southeast side, so you'd have to sail around it. Then we bore straight away for the South Foreland Light. And the South Foreland Light is literally a 10-minute drive from where I'm sitting right now. It is a lighthouse up at St Margaret's at Cliff, just outside Dover. They're listing all the different places that they're sailing past as they go up the English Channel towards essentially London or wherever it is they intend to finally land. But again, in that verse, sometimes some of those lines do get changed. We sailed by Beachy, by Fairlie and Dungeness. Dungeness, getting that into that one sort of beat, that Dungeness beat, sometimes gets changed to by Fairlie and Dover. I do prefer the original Dungeness because it's an important bit of the coastline, and also with South Foreland Light, you're kind of mentioning Dover anyway. You wouldn't really sail to Dover and then bear away to the South Foreland Light. You're practically at it by the time you hit Dover, whereas Dungeness is a little bit further up the coastline. Really interesting place, actually, Dungeness. It's, I think, Europe's only, certainly the UK's only, coastal desert. The signal was made for the Grand Fleet to anchor all in the Downs that night for to lie. Let go your shank painter, let go your cat stopper, haul up your clue garnets, let tack and sheets fly. Now the fourth verse again is quite close to my heart because of the second line, but we'll get to that. So the first line is, then the signal was made for the Grand Fleet to anchor. They anchor all in the Downs. Now the Downs is literally right out the window here. The Downs is an area just off the coast of Deal. Basically, between Deal and France, there is a stretch of sand known as the Goodwin Sands. It's about 4 miles off the coast here, and it is considered one of the most dangerous areas for sailing in the entire world because these sandbanks, at high tide, they are completely under the water, but only just, which makes it incredibly easy to beach a ship on them if you're not sure how to sail through. At low tide, there are still some bits that now are above the water and you can clearly see, but there are still some that are just below the surface, still making it incredibly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So why would they anchor there? Because this is a natural anchorage. To the west, you have the coastline of Kent. To the east, you have the sandbanks, and these act as a windbreak. You still get wind from the north and south, so shelter is a little bit of a relative term in this regards, but essentially it was a place where ships would anchor frequently, and the Goodwin Sands and the Downs, the area between the Goodwin Sands and the coastline here in Kent, was very important to the naval history of England, which is what made Deal such an important maritime port at the time, one of the original 5 sank ports. There was a lot of stuff historically goes on in Deal. It's one of the things I'm very proud of with my hometown. So to hear it mentioned in the song is just, beautiful. I love it. So then we have let go your shank painter, let go your cat stopper. And this is all to do with the anchor on a ship. Now, a shank painter was essentially a stretch of rope that held the shank of the anchor near to the flukes up to the front of the ship. And the cat stopper was again basically a part of the ship that would be used for lowering the anchor. Just out of interest, the idea of lowering or raising an anchor aboard a ship would be called catting an anchor, to weigh it, to drop it, and fishing an anchor to bring it up. So in this case, let go your shank painter, let go your cat stopper is basically just a long-winded way of saying drop the anchor. That's then followed up with haul up your clue garnets, let tacks and sheets fly. Clue garnets is a really interesting part of nautical terminology. It's also where we get the term clued up from. I know it's very easy to think of clued up as being C-L-U-E, clue, but that actually in itself comes from clue garnets, which were essentially ways to attach the sheets, the sails, to the ship. And therefore, if a ship's sails were actually properly attached, they would be clued up. So they knew where they were going. Whereas if they came undone and thus were just flapping in the wind, they would be without a clue. And that's where the term a clue or an idea actually originally comes from. This originally is spelled C-L-E-W. I just love that little bit of etymology. So clue garnets are the ways to attach the sails to the mast. Therefore, by haul up your clue garnets, you're basically rolling the sails up. Your tacks and sheets, again, this is just letting those blow in the wind because we're at anchor. It's pointless having this here where the wind's going to catch it and drag us all around whilst we're on the anchor. Therefore, we may as well just unattach those so that the wind can sail across the ship without moving us. So let's every man toss off a full bumper and let's every man drink up his full glass. We'll drink and be jolly and drown melancholy, singing here's a good health to my true-hearted lass. Now the final verse of the song is essentially the sailors celebrating that they are home. The first line does come across a little bit dodgy if you've not got the cleanest of minds, so let every man toss off a full bumper. Now bumper, the word is actually bombard, which would have been a large leather tankard which the men would have drunk from. So bombard became bomber, became bumper. It's nautical slang essentially for a leather tankard. So let every man toss off a full bumper, let every man chug his drink all the way down. And let every man drink up a full glass, which then would have been your rum or brandy or whatever else they might have happened to have on board. We'll drink and be jolly and drown melancholy, singing here's a good health to my true-hearted lass. Celebrating that they've made it all the way home and drown those melancholy feelings with alcohol. We're going to drink and try and forget that we've left our loves behind us in Spain. Some of the men would have stayed true to those women, hoping that they would go back to Spain, maybe starting a family. Others may have just gone, you know what, screw it. We've left that behind, it's time for new things, and done the typical sailor thing of heading into port and finding a new girl. But for the most part there, singing here's a good health to my true-hearted lass kind of suggests that most of the men are still feeling a bit sad that they've left their Spanish ladies behind them, so they're going to drink and be jolly and drown those melancholy feelings and look forward to perhaps sailing back to Spain sometime soon. Or maybe they could, retire from the Navy and make their own way down to Spain on a merchant vessel and settle for a new life down there. Who knows? This all finishes off again with the chorus, we'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors. And this, to me, the fact is, obviously the chorus does go after every single verse, but after that lines of we'll drink and be jolly, drown melancholy, singing here's a good health to my true-hearted lass, we'll rant and we'll roar like true British sailors, kind of takes a new meaning. Now it's that they're drunk and jolly and trying to sing their troubles away and act like, it's fine, we've left our loves behind, but maybe one day we can go back, or let's look to the future. And like true British sailors, we're just going to get on with life. And that until we strike soundings. Early on, it's like we will, we'll sail and we will be aggressive sailors until we get home. This time around, it almost feels flipped. That they're ranting and roaring because they're now drinking to be jolly and to forget what they've left behind. Until they strike those soundings, when suddenly the realization that their home will hit them and everything comes crashing back. From Ushant to Scilly, it's 35 leagues, which means from the Downs to Spain is a lot further. And that's Spanish Ladies. I love this song to pieces. I think it is a fantastic piece of maritime history. It is so incredibly well written and documented. It's a full gaze into the life of a sailor during the Napoleonic era. It speaks to love and to loss. It speaks to the adventure of sailing on the seas. It speaks to kind of getting on with your life and just drinking and being jolly, drowning your melancholy. Now, I'm not suggesting that the best thing to do if you're sad is to have a few drinks. I don't think drowning your melancholy in alcohol is necessarily the best way forward. But I do still appreciate the concept of we're not going to be too sad about this. We've gone on this amazing journey. We fell in love with these beautiful women. We're hoping that one day we're going to go back to them. So let's have a good old sing-song en route. And interestingly enough, this wasn't always a shanty. Now, a shanty is obviously a song that's sung at sea, but they're not the only songs sung at sea. That's a bit of a tongue twister. There are two main types of seafaring songs, shanties and four-bitters. Now, a four-bitter is basically just a ballad that was sung on the ship to help men keep their spirits up. They'd sing together, or just have one man performing at the front and singing these songs as entertainment. Called a four-bitter because the bitter is essentially a wooden post at the front of the ship that the anchor and things would be tied to, and that's where they would sing because it was out of the way, it was a place that they could go and socialise. A shanty, on the other hand, is a song that has a work focus. A shanty is usually used for either heaving, so pushing a capstan, or hauling. A halyard shanty is for hauling up ropes. And the concept of a shanty was that if you're hauling up ropes, you've got a dozen men all trying to pull these lines at the same time. So you want a song that has a strong beat to it, so that you can sit there and go like, okay, 1, 2, 3, haul, 1, 2, 3, haul, 1, 2, 3, haul. And Spanish Ladies originally started as a four-bitter, but eventually moved across to being a capstan shanty. It doesn't have the timing required or the call and response for things like a halyard shanty, but it could be used as a capstan shanty. It was also one of only a handful of songs that were actually allowed on British naval vessels. Most of the shanties as we know them today would have come from commercial vessels like packet ships and things. The Navy actually had quite a strict policy against singing shanties, believe it or not. This was one of the few that did make the grade in the British Navy, which again, I think just makes it that little bit more special. And hopefully you've enjoyed this little journey through Spanish Ladies. If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Consider hitting like, subscribing to the channel if you want more of this kind of content. Otherwise, folks, happy sailing, and see you all next time.